Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, May 31st, 2013. We're at the end of May. June starts tomorrow. And there's still snow falling on parts of the northern hemisphere here right now. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is in the control room, twiddling the dials, managing the Truth Warp Drive, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Little program note, Claire will not be joining us in our third hour today. She had a scheduling conflict. She has to go out and do Claire's stuff. But she will, of course, be back here a week from today with her unique perspective on things. So, opportunity to call on in, voice your particular opinion on what is going on in the world. We're counting down those last few hours before this asteroid is going to zip by planet Earth. In fact, the closest approach is about an hour after the end of our show today. And contrary to some of the fear-mongering YouTube videos that were put out about this asteroid, it's actually going to be 3 times as far from Earth as the Moon is. It is so small you cannot see it except in really, really large telescopes. And the only really notable thing about this is it turns out this asteroid has its own moon that's whipping around it. And so it's not a danger to Earth. It's merely a curiosity for astronomers. But it was amazing. There were some videos put out there saying it will pass within 0.0185 astronomical units of the Earth. Well, an astronomical unit is 93 million miles. And so they were just trying to hype this up and say, oh, it's going to be a near miss. No, it's not a near miss. Not a near miss at all. All right, getting on to Pentagate. And this is cranking up more and more. A lot of attention is being focused on the fact that the former commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service visited the White House 157 times during the Obama administration. Certainly far more intense interaction between the White House and this private collection agency for the private bank than previous administrations, going back to Richard Nixon. Dick Morris is out there saying, there is no question, Obama had to be deeply involved in the IRS targeting, and that's the only reason the IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman would have visited the White House on such a regular basis. Now, I'm sure, I'm already going to tell you what the White House is going to say, that they were working on the IRS involvement in Obamacare. But still, it raises a lot of questions, and we're back to that whole Nixon point of view. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Because nobody in the IRS is going to engage in such blatantly politically biased activity, which is illegal, without being told to by a higher authority here. A lot of people starting to raise eyebrows over the fact that IRS agents are now carrying shotguns, which, there is an armed unit in the criminal division. Agents will carry sidearms, but now they're carrying, shotguns. And back in 2010, the Federal Business Opportunities website posted a request for proposal from the Internal Revenue Service on, quote, on price of shotguns. So we're getting into this idea where they're going to start kicking down the door and point shotguns at you if you don't have the Obama-approved health insurance or whatever else is going on here. We are finding out now, of course, that U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder personally approved Obama's secret effort to seize email and phone records of journalists in the corporate media and presumably the independent media as well. So this is getting closer to the Oval Office itself. 1 degree of separation. And we know what Obama's going to do. He's going to do the same thing Richard Nixon did. Oh, it was all the fault of that Attorney General, and he is fired. And it won't work this time any better than it worked last time. But I guess Obama just figured, I'll follow the Nixon plan. I've got nothing better to do. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about Eric Holder, who is now confirmed to have been directly involved in the authorization of this spy operation against corporate media, journalists, and executives, and apparently also the independent media as well. And now Congress is going to hold new hearings investigating whether Holder actually committed perjury in the earlier hearings where he was trying to deny that he had anything to do with this. The Department of Justice is already sending out their propagandists to say, no, if you really analyze what he said carefully, he didn't really deny it, and it's not really perjury. We're back to that sort of Clintonian evasion about it all depends on what the meaning of is, that he was trying to weasel out of his having fibbed about Monica Lewinsky. So we recognize all this behavior all over again. We've seen it way too many times in American history. They got caught. They're doing what people in positions of power love to do. They got caught, and they're trying to still maintain the illusion that the federal government is legitimate because ultimately it will follow the laws, even though we know that they don't. And this is going to turn into quite a circus here. And apparently new tornado warnings for Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. So if you're in those states, keep an eye out for the weather, what's going on here. Now, I want to get back onto the Boston bombing. There are some new developments there. The younger brother, the one who was in the boat where initially they claimed he tried to commit suicide by shooting himself in the throat. Then it turned out it was a knife wound in the throat. Then they were saying he couldn't talk, but he confessed to the bombing by nodding and grunting and whatever during his initial interrogation before a judge came in and said he wasn't Mirandized and he has a right to stay silent until he gets a lawyer to represent him. Well, apparently Zokar is recovering from his ordeal. He is now able to walk around without using a wheelchair, and he called his mother and spoke to her on the telephone, during which he reassured her he was going to be okay and reiterated that he and his older brother, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, are innocent of any wrongdoing. So again, we've got dueling stories. We've got the corporate media and the police and the FBI saying, oh yes, they're guilty of all these horrible things. Don't even think there's a possibility they're innocent. They're guilty of all kinds of things here. And we were told that he was never going to be able to speak again. Obviously, that's wrong. And now that he is speaking again, he is telling everybody that he can talk to that, no, he and Tamerlan didn't do anything in Boston. CNN is now acknowledging the execution-style killing of Ibrahim Todashev, that he was unarmed when the FBI shot him 7 times, including what appears to have been the last shot through the crown of his head. And if you look at the photo of that injury, and you see the way the skin around the entry wound is all puffed up, that's an indication of a close-to-contact gunshot, because the gun propellant comes flying out behind the shell and literally imprints tattoos into the skin, puffing it up. It's a classic giveaway of a contact gun wound. This guy was executed. I'm not the only one saying it. The father of Ibrahim is saying this needs to be investigated. And, of course, the FBI's official story, which has been flipping and flopping faster than Mitt Romney's campaign promises last year, now trying to say, well, no, he didn't have a knife, but he attacked us. He attacked us with a metal pole. Really? Where did he get the metal pole? And they're trying to make it look like these guys had to shoot this guy 7 times, including a gunshot into his skull, to save themselves. Real manly men, these FBI agents here. But what it looks like to me is that this Boston bombing false flag is blowing up in their face. They were foolish and reckless to try it with the American people as skeptical about the government as they are right now. And Tamerlan and Zokar were not supposed to survive that incident. So the FBI could do to them like they did to Bruce Ivins. Oh, yes, he's dead, but we know he's guilty. No question, he's guilty, just like they're saying about Ibrahim now. Where, yes, he confessed. He confessed that he was part of that triple murder and that Tamerlan was involved. And he's dead now and he can't answer, but take our word for it. We're the FBI. We would never lie to you. Which is, in fact, what they historically have been doing all along. And what I think was going on was the FBI was trying to coerce Ibrahim into signing this pre-written confession that he was involved in this murder and Tamerlan was there with him, so they could demonize Tamerlan and silence those saying, you know, these 2 brothers, the Tsarnaevs, may have been innocent, or they may have been intelligence assets who were set up and framed, the way Lee Oswald was. And they needed this confession to try and silence the doubters. And Ibrahim stood his ground, said, I'm not going to sign that. And when he tried to leave, they got into an altercation. Because had Ibrahim left that meeting alive, he would have immediately gone public and said, the FBI is trying to force me to sign a false confession. And they could never allow that to happen. Remember, J. Edgar Hoover's #1 rule for people working for the FBI, never embarrass the agency. You would think the #1 rule would be uphold the law, but not in Hoover's mind. Meanwhile, possibly as a distraction from what's going on over there with Eric Holder, the Department of Justice has issued new guidelines for government offices in the United States, saying they may not use the words husband and wife anymore. It's now considered hate speech because it might wound the feelings of the gays and transgendered individuals, and by imperial edict, you will always use the phrase partner or spouse. And you cannot use the phrase husband and wife any longer, because that will offend a certain group of people. I've never actually met any gay people that really had a problem with those words. They would take them in context. I've seen gay couples, they're completely cool about this. This is just more grandstanding by the Justice Department to try and distract from Eric Holder and this whole spying on the corporate media situation by creating a new issue. Let's get the gays all fanned up again, and the news will go cover them and leave us alone. Now, interesting little anniversary, if you will, regarding the Sandy Hook false flag, because it's now been 6 months and there is still no official report of exactly what happened. We know the story keeps changing. We know much of the story was absolutely impossible. The initial story was that Adam Lanza walked into this school with a long gun, an assault weapon, because we've got to demonize the assault weapons. Then it turned out there was no way for him to get into the school through their security carrying a long rifle, because it's a video-monitored, remotely locked door. And then later on it came out that the long gun was actually found in the trunk of his car. So the story was mutating and changing, and we're 6 months on and still no official report. They can't put the story together in a way that anybody's going to buy. Now, getting on over to Benghazi, there's a new fact that has surfaced, and that is apparently U.S. government officials ordered the Benghazi Medical Center to put the name John Doe on the medical records and the death certificate of Ambassador Christopher Stevens when he was in that hospital. Now, the official story is they were trying to avoid undue attention while they tried to figure out how they were going to get the body back to the United States of America. What I think is a more likely reason is they were trying to hold their options open, because we know after the real Osama bin Laden died back in late 2001, we had all these phonies going on there. And if, in fact, this was an October surprise, they may have thought about saying, well, Christopher Stevens is kidnapped, we don't know where he is, where's Christopher Stevens, and build the drama that way, and then try and resolve the situation in some other staged event that would make Obama look good for the election, and they couldn't figure out a way to make that work, so finally they said, yes, he's dead, and they brought him home. But again, it indicates there was a cover-up and control of information going on all along. There really was no reason for them to say, just call him a John Doe. We've got to hide the fact that he's dead. We've got to hide the fact that he's here. Now, the corporate media has been making a big deal about this Arizona woman who was down in Mexico, and she was in jail for a week on a drug smuggling charge, and everybody's saying, oh, those gosh darn Mexicans and whatever. But apparently the Mexican court looked at her case, including the security footage that was shot of her, and decided, yeah, in fact, she was set up. So she's now been released. So she's out of jail and on her way home. And this is not going to be very good for Mexican tourism, which I guess would be good for tourism here in Hawaii, because people who are fed up with the TSA tend to take their tourism dollars down to Mexico, and now with this scandal with the Mexican police down there, maybe they'll come back to Hawaii and we can get our economy back. We'll get our economy back here when TSA stops groping people at the airports and stealing things out of their luggage here. All right, I want to get over onto the situation in Syria. Russia is making a real issue over the discovery by Turkish forces that members of this al-Nusra Front, who are on the side of the hired mercenary army in Syria, were in possession of sarin nerve gas. And Russia is saying this is a very serious issue. We need to know where the gas came from and for what these hired mercenaries were going to use it. Of course, I'm sure Russia is remembering, as we all do, how a few months ago the U.S. government was openly discussing staging a false flag chemical weapons attack on the people of Syria to be blamed on Assad to get the war going. And it looks like they may have been on the verge of doing precisely that, and they got busted on it. So Russia is demanding an explanation from the hired mercenary army. And now Russia has the high ground in this situation in Syria. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the recent discovery by Turkish officials that the al-Nusra Front safe house they raided in Turkey had sarin nerve gas on the premises. This hard evidence. They've got the canisters of the nerve gas. And Moscow is playing this as hard as they can. Because we remember not too long ago when Israel and the United States were screaming, Assad has chemical weapons, he's using them, we know it's half true. No, there's no proof, we can't show you the proof, we'll compromise our intelligence gathering apparatus. And it was just more of the same thing we heard coming out of Iraq. Well, so now Turkey, and I'm sure it was quite by accident, they weren't expecting to find this stuff there, they raided this safe house for the al-Nusra Front because of their involvement in some terror bombings inside Turkey itself, trying to help stir the frenzy for war a little bit more. And now they've got it. Moscow is demanding that the hired mercenary army inside Syria explain where they got the sarin gas and just what they were going to do with it. And were they, in fact, going to gas some innocent Syrian people and then spray paint the wall, Assad was here, come and get me? Or words to that effect here. And politically, this gives Russia a great deal of legitimacy to be in Syria right now. And Russia, along with the S-300 missile system and a bunch of other stuff, Russia has now agreed to sell at least 10, they're already starting to run the number up even higher than that, 10 of their MiG-29 fighters to Syria. This is a very formidable warplane. Got the latest advanced avionics. It's a very capable fighter. And that means the Syrians, if the Syrian pilots are trained up to use these aircraft effectively, it's going to make a no-fly zone virtually impossible to enforce. Between the anti-air defense systems and the MiG-29s, Syria can keep its skies to itself right now. The Pentagon issued a report not too long ago that the F-35, our most advanced, most expensive warplane, which, by the way, is still not deployed for active duty because of all of its problems, but if it were, because of its poor visibility to the rear and less than sterling aerodynamic performance, which is sacrificed for its radar stealth, were it to get into a dogfight with the MiG-29, it would in all probability lose. Meanwhile, down in Israel, they're certainly cranking up. They want this war to happen. Netanyahu needs a war. Obama needs a war to distract from Pentagate. The IDF is extending their air, sea, and land capabilities for long-range missions, which would obviously include a strike into Iran. And they're covering this. Netanyahu, talk about chutzpah. Netanyahu is out there still proclaiming Israel is the most threatened state in the world. We're victims. Everybody hates us. You've got to give us money and weapons to save us from all those gosh darned Iranians and Iraq. Well, you already took care of Iraq. And we were in danger from the Libyans. No, wait, you went and invaded and killed them for us, too. And it's nonsense. Israel is, according to who you listen to, the world's fifth or sixth most powerful nuclear-armed state. Germany has acknowledged, they have known for years, that Israel arms the Dolphin-class submarines Germany is giving them with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. Israel is not the most threatened state in the world. They are the most threatening state in the world. They can't go 6 months without attacking somebody. And they're just going along with this, oh, they made us do it, Mommy. They were evil. We had to kill them first. Remember, what was it, last week, following the exchange of hostilities across the Golan, Israel went to the United Nations and said, you've got to punish Syria. They're escalating the war. And then somebody says, what about all the times that Israel flew into Syria and bombed the place? And Israel comes back and says, only anti-Semites are paying attention to that. It's just amazing. It's like Israel doesn't really expect anybody to believe any of this stuff. They just demand you go along with it. Or they'll scream that you're a Jew hater and an anti-Semite and the rest of it. But the reality is that Israel is a nuclear-armed state. It's the only one in the Middle East. It has a very formidable military, paid for in large part by the American taxpayer. Nobody is threatening Israel. Even if Iran had a nuclear bomb, they're not going to use it on Israel or the United States because the immediate response would be nuclear annihilation. It's Israel that's provoking all of this stuff. And they'll say whatever they think anybody's going to buy, where they can say, oh, it was their fault. They made us, they were thinking bad things about it. We have to kill them because we know they're getting ready to kill us. Blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, Jonathan Ben-Artzi, now he's a mathematician at Cambridge University. He is also Netanyahu's nephew. And he's basically at Cambridge because he refused to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. He's spent a year in jail for it. And he's out there saying, yeah, Israel is an apartheid state. We can't go on pretending it isn't. It's making Israel look like a joke to the world with their denial. They look worse than South Africa. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And interestingly enough, just got this story coming in here that the European Union has now lifted economic sanctions in Syria, but only for the hired mercenary army. And they've announced European banks, meaning the private central banks, are now being allowed and encouraged to open branches and accounts in Syria for use by the opposition. We saw the same thing in Libya. Get that private central bank on the ground before the fighting is even over. These hired mercenaries, even as they're trying to take control of Syria, they're turning it over to the private central bankers. That is the agenda. Now, the ADL, which would not exist were there not this constant screaming that there's anti-Semitism and Nazis and all the rest of it going on there, has just received a $7.5 million grant to conduct a new study on anti-Semitic attitudes. And for $7.5 million, I'm sure we're going to get all kinds of pretty charts and graphics and all the rest of this out here. But the important thing to understand is, when they start waving around anti-Semitism again, to the tune of $7.5 million in media support, it means Israel is about to start a major war. We have seen this pattern before. Every time Israel is gearing up to attack somebody, we're going to be flooded with anti-Semitism this. We're going to be flooded on TV with movies about the Nazis. And Shutter Island was on the air last night. I talked about that one before. Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio is playing this patient at this mental hospital, and right in the middle of it, oh, we've got to have a flashback to World War II, and we've got to have Nazis and all the rest of that. Which is why I didn't like the movie at all. I'm sick and tired of Nazis. You know, that all happened before I was even born. We have issues today that we should be looking at. And so I'm expecting, starting through this weekend, we're going to see all over our cable TV channels replays of movies. I mean, we just got done being saturated by them during Memorial Day weekend. It was all these movies about World War II and the Germans are bad and the Nazis are bad and Hitler was evil. And they'll keep that up because every time Israel's going to start a war, that's what we see on the American corporate media. Reminder about how bad the Nazis were and how suffering the Jewish people were. And, you know, it's really understandable if they want to go out and kill the Palestinians and the Syrians and the Lebanese and whoever else it is they're targeting this time. And I think one of the ways we know that Israel is in fact getting ready to escalate the situation is Netanyahu has now ordered what are called personal protection kits for all Israelis. To the best of my recollection, this is the first time he's done this since the first war against Iraq. Desert Storm. And these kits are not cheap. They have all kinds of little prepper goodies in there, including gas masks. And so these are now being issued to the people of Israel, and that basically tells us that, yeah, Israel's going to find some way to get this thing going. And, of course, Israel's continuing to be Israel. They're hoping, under everybody looking at Syria and all these other places, that Israel now has a sort of an attention vacuum to start accelerating their situation. Apparently, Israel is preparing to build 1,000 new Jewish-only homes in occupied East Jerusalem. All of this in violation of the United Nations. And apparently, they're not even going through the pretext of having the Israeli courts saying, yes, we can build here or not. The Palestinians, whose homes are being bulldozed to make way for these new residences in East Jerusalem, are saying the bulldozers just show up. There's no paperwork, there's no eviction, there's nothing. The bulldozers show up, our homes are destroyed, they start laying foundations. It's ethnic cleansing. Now remember, the United Nations has declared repeatedly that Jerusalem is supposed to be a shared city because of its historical and religious importance. There is a Jewish section, there is a Christian section, and there is the Muslim section. And Israel repeatedly has been trying to commandeer all of it. And the United Nations has passed numerous resolutions condemning Israel for this. Israel holds the world's record for most defiance of the United Nations. You remember when we were going into Iraq the second time, and George Bush was up there saying, well, Iraq is defying the United Nations by having these weapons of mass destruction. And it turned out, afterwards, that Iraq was in compliance with the United Nations resolutions. He had, in fact, destroyed all of his weapons of mass destruction, which is what the IAEA was confirming at the time. So we have this ridiculous idea of the United States invading and destroying Iraq for allegedly defying the United Nations on a couple of resolutions while still sending your tax money and all kinds of weapons to Israel, which is the all-time Olympic gold medal winner of flipping the bird at the United Nations. Meanwhile, over in Jaffa, another mass grave of Palestinians killed in 1948 during the creation of Israel has been found. Hundreds of bodies killed and just dumped in a mass grave. Nasty, nasty stuff here. Remember the other day when I mentioned that there is a huge organized crime problem in Israel? And very often they carry out attacks on each other's facilities, nightclubs, things like that. And the automatic reaction of the Israeli media is to say, oh, it's Palestinian terrorists, it's Muslim terrorists, it's so forth and so on, which basically allows organized crime to go on carrying out these bombings because they know nobody's ever going to even try and examine. And now we have this story that's coming out of the ugly truth where 2 Israeli soldiers were caught preparing bombs and selling them to organized crime figures inside Israel, presumably using materials stolen from the IDF, which were bought and paid for with your tax dollars. Now, Iran has issued a statement that they will not allow the overthrow of the Syria government. This is a little tough talk, and frankly, it's a little provocative, but we understand Iran and Syria do have a mutual defense treaty, which Iran, which is a lot more honorable about their treaty obligations than, for example, the United States, is having to stand up and say, this has reached a crisis point. Iran may be emboldened by the very obvious presence of Russian support for Syria. All of this, of course, is very, very, very dangerous. Meanwhile, up in Iraq, that situation is getting ready to fall apart. Apparently, their provisional government coalition is starting to split along Sunni and Shiite lines. There have been over 600 people killed in sectarian violence in Iraq this month. Boy, Iraq is so much better off ever since the United States invaded, right? Got rid of Saddam Hussein, who was a secular leader, and kept everything calm. Saddam Hussein treated Iraq the way the Founding Fathers treated the United States of America. Everybody has freedom of religion, but no one religion has access to government power, so they can't use it to oppress the other religions. Well, that all went out the window when the U.S. lied their way into the occupation. And that situation's deteriorating, and the United States does not have the resources to go back in and steady things down. So they're going to pretend it's not really a problem, as they usually do. Meanwhile, a Chinese think tank has warned of the potential of a military conflict with Japan over these Diaoyu Islands. And again, from the U.S. point of view, they're trying to find a doorway into a war with China in order to politically and, most importantly, economically isolate China before that gold-backed yuan becomes a bigger threat to the U.S. dollar than it already is. China and Venezuela were doing direct trade without going through the U.S. dollar. China and Australia are doing currency exchanges without going through the dollar. China and New Zealand are getting ready to go through currency exchanges without going through the U.S. dollar. And so China and its gold-backed yuan is a huge, huge threat to the primacy of the Federal Reserve System and its paper dollars. The U.S. wants to go back to the world of Bretton Woods. And the rest of the world looked at how the U.S. ripped off the planet by overprinting dollars following Bretton Woods, and then reneging on the gold convertibility. And they don't want to go back to Bretton Woods. They want to move away from the dollar because they can see it self-destructing. And this is the reason the U.S. is, to get this dollarification process to work, to get the world back to Bretton Woods, it's an all-or-nothing proposition. And that means they're looking for a reason to go to war against China, and they're probably not all that unhappy about the possibility of war with Russia, because Russia took control of their central bank. They kicked out their money junkies. Their economy is in great shape compared to the United States of America. The money junkies are literally risking incinerating the surface of planet Earth to prop up this piece of paper with ink all over it. I know the corporate media is still going on about global warming and asteroids whizzing by and all these other things that you should be afraid of. But what you should be most afraid of right now are these private central bankers who have a history of sending hundreds of millions of human beings to death and disfigurement to prop up their little Ponzi scheme, paper and ink banking scam. That's the real danger to planet Earth and to the human race. Not the asteroids, not global warming, not the latest flu pandemic. That's child's play compared to the damage that private central banking has done throughout history here. Now, George W. Bush, who really started cranking up this whole century of unending war and the project for the new American century, he has suffered a bad attack of hoof-in-mouth disease. He basically came out and issued a statement, or he was caught saying, that he does not feel sorry for any of America's service people who have been injured during these unending wars. And he basically came out and said, look, you can't help the fact people are going to get hurt in wars, and because they all volunteered, it absolves him of any feelings of remorse over the fact that they got crippled. And he went further to say that he's not aware of any veterans of these wars who are angry about their injuries. They're all supposed to be proud of it. We gave them a little tiny piece of plastic on a cheap ribbon to stick on their the front of their jacket, and they should feel really good about this stuff. And I think it underscores the callousness that we have seen in the government towards the military people. And there's nothing new about that, going all the way back to Henry Kissinger, where he said military people are just dumb, stupid brutes to be used as pawns in foreign policy. That's how they think about your sons and your daughter. They're just chips in the great game, and we're going to lose some chips, and we're going to break some chips, and hey, that's just the cost of doing business. But it is rare to see a former president come out that blatantly insensitive to all the pain and suffering their grand designs for global domination have caused. He's just literally out there saying, I don't feel sorry for them. Hey, they volunteered. It's not my fault they all got killed and crippled and addicted to antidepressants. All righty, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. The Eurozone, again, they're still in trouble. They're still sinking. Nobody will point the finger of blame where it needs to go. Maybe. More about that in a little bit. Unemployment in Europe has reached a new record high. Now, they're claiming it is only 12.2%, but we may presume that the European Union is fudging their job numbers to the same extent the United States government is proven to do. But they've got about 19.4 million acknowledged out of work. 25% of young people are without a job. And there's a new phenomenon over there. They're calling it the Blockupy movement. Not the Occupy movement, the Blockupy movement. And at this moment, there are thousands and thousands of these Blockupy activists who are surrounding and blocking access to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. And there's even a live stream of their protest that we link to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And the media still goes on and on about how these protesters are anti-capitalist. They hate capitalism. And I want to clarify something, and we went through the same debate during the Occupy protests. These people are not anti-capitalist. They are anti-fascist. Because when you have a private central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, a system designed to produce more debt than money with which to pay that debt, that is not a capitalist economic system, all pretenses to the contrary notwithstanding. It is a fascist economic system, which forces the 99% into hard poverty to keep the 1% wealthy. That's what's going on. These protesters are pro-capitalist. But the fascists are still trying to pretend they are capitalists, and that if the system isn't working for you, well, it's just all your own fault here. So Frankfurt is now surrounded, and this is a protest I can get behind. I was very much opposed to Kokesh's armed march into Washington, D.C. as a provocation, but peaceful, nonviolent blocking of the private central banks, that's not a bad idea, especially because it is the private central banks that have created this mess. The White House and the Congress, they just work for the bankers. We don't need to harass the employees. We need to go to the authors of all this misery. Interesting little story here from the Internet Post. They're already out there proclaiming U.S. banks post record profits in the first quarter. Huzzah, huzzah, the money junkies are just raking it in. Profits surged by 15.8% compared to the same quarter last year. Well, it's kind of hard not to show a profit when the Federal Reserve is cranking out $85 billion a month in new money and handing it to these banks while taking those worthless mortgage-backed securities and dumping them on the American taxpayer. This record profits has nothing to do with business. It's all about swapping brand new money for those worthless investments, giving the banks the money and putting the worthless investments on the American people. And that, too, is fascism. Student loan delinquency rate in the United States has hit a brand new record high. All these kids got lured into college with promises of high-paying jobs, and you're going to go on out there and you're going to make millions of dollars in extra money over your lifetime. All of it was a lie. The high-paying jobs are gone. They've all been incentivized to go to other countries. And these kids go through college, they rack up $100,000, sometimes $200,000 in student debt, which, as of my last understanding, cannot be discharged with a bankruptcy. It's considered a non-dischargeable debt. And these kids come out of college and there's nothing but, burger joint jobs at minimum wage. McDonald's is now demanding a 4-year college degree to be a cashier, to try and make it look like this is, yes, you've got to have a college education to be counting money at our restaurants. And it was another scam. Higher education in the United States stopped being about higher education and became about just another way to drive the Americans into debt slavery. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're looking at the stock market here, and despite the huge upshove, about an hour into the day's trading, the markets are back in the red and seem to be heading down rather dramatically. The volume just picked up, so maybe the plunge protection team is going to try and do late in the day massaging of the market so they can get their traditional Friday happy ending. But I think the trend over the last few days, I think investors have to be getting very nervous that this bubble, this stock bubble, is getting ready to burst here. Somebody just sent me an interesting little article from F-35 in South Burlington, blogspot.com. Apparently Chuck Yeager, Mr. Right Stuff, has the same low opinion of the F-35 that I do, which is going to be interesting. I actually got to meet him many years ago at Edwards Air Force Base. And he was at the height of his fame because of the movie, The Right Stuff, and he was having a good time, which, after all the years that he was kept in anonymity for his accomplishments, it was kind of nice that he finally got the recognition he so richly deserved here. Now, getting back to the economy. Back in 2009, when things were really becoming, it was obvious that something had gone horribly wrong with our economic system, President Obama offered a plan to save American jobs. He promised he was going to crack down on these corporate tax loopholes that incentivized the transfer of jobs to foreign countries in order to avoid paying billions of dollars in U.S. taxes each year. Okay? And that was another one of Obama's promises. But apparently, again, because of major corporate lobbying, Democrats in Congress caved in. Obama stopped talking about it, and that tax loophole survives to this very day. And that is why we have all these kids coming out of college, freshly educated, deep in debt, and there are no jobs for them to pay that debt. And I get very angry when I see these money junkies up there saying the system works, you're just lazy, you don't want to work, you don't want to have a job, you've got a bad work ethic. We all want to work. We like the self-respect that comes from going out and doing something that we've worked hard to learn how to do. But if the job just isn't physically there, what are we supposed to do? Now, a lot of people are turning to entrepreneurial activity to reinvent themselves and create their own jobs. But you're not going to get the whole country back to work doing that way. But that tax loophole that we've talked about over the last couple of years, that literally provides financial incentives for American companies to take their high-paying jobs over to other countries, to move their manufacturing to these other countries. That loophole is still there. And while that loophole is still there, the high-paying jobs are not going to come back, with which we could pay off all this massive debt that keeps piling up. And it's just a reminder that nobody in Washington, D.C. is really keeping an overview of what is best for the whole country. When you're piling up debt at the same time you take the jobs away, what kind of thinking is that? They got to be on drugs in D.C. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are still open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Now, moving on to Obamacare, there are a couple of developments there you need to be aware of. Okay. It is now being estimated that Obamacare will result in individual health insurance premiums increasing between 64 to 146%. That's a huge uplift. In other words, if you are paying $400 a month for your health care insurance, the least it will go up to is $600 a month. And it could go up to $1,000. For all the talk about how this was affordable health care for Americans, quite the contrary. Health care is getting more expensive. It's a giveaway to the medical establishment and the health insurance companies. And it gets even worse because do you remember when Obama was selling this to the American people? He was out there saying that if you liked your own private health care policy, you could keep it. You wouldn't have to sign on to any of the new plans that were being created for Obamacare. You could keep your own. Well, wrong. Because under the actual implementation of Obamacare, your insurance company can simply cancel your current policy by saying it is not in compliance with the requirements of Obamacare. And then you will be forced to go out and buy a new health care plan, which is probably going to be a lot more expensive, with a lot less benefits. And if you don't, you're going to have the IRS come down on you. We saw the same thing following when automobile insurance was made mandatory. Premiums went up, service and benefits went down, and the profitability of the insurance companies went right through the roof. And so now this promise that you are going to be allowed to keep your own current health insurance policy, not true. If it fails to come up to the high standards demanded by Obamacare, your insurance company will send you a cancellation notice. We're canceling your policy because it doesn't meet the standards, and here are the new policies that you must buy in order to be in compliance, or the IRS will hit you with a charge. And again, it shows a serious absence of any kind of an overview of what's going on in the country. This is simply pandering to the health insurance companies, who pretty much wrote all of Obamacare. And the attitude is, we'll just figure a way that we can take more money from the American people by saying, you must buy this and you must buy that. At the same time, other vested financial interests are taking the high-paying jobs away from the United States of America. We, the American people, just do not have the money to meet all of these requirements. We just don't have the money. And I know within Wall Street and Washington, D.C., it is still an article of faith of the money junkies that there is a vast amount of untapped wealth out here in the hinterland, and they just have to figure out a new way to get their hands on it, and all will be well. It just isn't true. It is not true. There's very little money left out here in the nation. That's why so much of commerce is starting to lock up. Everybody's sitting there waiting for somebody else to make good on a bill that's owed. And the banks come in and say, oh, we'll loan you money against this accounts receivable. And it's more vulture capitalism. You know, payday loan company abuses. As long as they've got you believing that your entire life revolves around those pieces of paper with ink on them, they got you. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back to talk about gold and Glass-Steagall. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And on the corporate media, the Department of Justice has just now announced they are going to cease these wide net castings into the phone records of the media. And if you believe that one, I've got some of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to sell you on that one. Back when they were doing it, the illusion to the public was the Department of Justice wasn't doing it. So the fact the Department of Justice is now saying we're not going to do it anymore, it's completely meaningless. Completely meaningless. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Michael. Two things I wanted to talk on real quick was, one, you just mentioned insurance about 15, 20 years ago when premiums went up and everything else went, the service went down. Hey, how about uninsured motorists? They made it a law. Everybody's got to have insurance, but you have to carry uninsured motorists. So what does that tell you about the law for some people?
Oh, I understand that. When they first made the insurance mandatory, I got hit by an uninsured motorist who promptly left the state, and so I wound up having to replace my car out of my own pocket. And it's just a joke. It's not about service to the public. It's just about, more money coming in, and they only do the minimum they need to do to make it look like what they're doing is legitimate. And now they're screaming about how all of these uninsured people with health problems are going to be driving. It's just an excuse to run the premiums up. And we're starting to see where the auto insurance realizes they've got to become competitive again. And I know because all the new cars have got these built-in computer snitch systems that you can actually get a lower insurance rate if you allow the insurance company access to that data. I think it's Progressive has this little gizmo that you plug into the data jack at the base of the steering wheel. And if you're not driving crazy, your rates can go down. There's redlining going on. If you live in certain neighborhoods, your rates are going to go up, and they have a lot of accountants and statisticians, just trying to maximize the profitability. But the reality is, for the vast majority of people, they're going to spend far more on insurance over the course of their life than the benefit they will get from the insurance company. I mean, I've carried auto insurance on my car since I started driving, and I've only ever actually filed one request for compensation when somebody stole the spare tire off of my Nissan Xterra. And I had insurance on that car itself that was outright refused the second time it blew up its engine. And they just found a technicality and said, oh, no, it wasn't the engine. It was this other thing which isn't covered, and therefore we don't have to buy you a new engine. And it's just all about making money. And the government, which is supposed to regulate business to balance the need between the needs of the people and the needs of business, has completely abandoned that role. And that's why we're seeing these abuses in every industry now.
Yeah, it's all about bottom line. You're right. Hey, the second thing I wanted to touch on is I called you yesterday, and I told you my mother said she talked to one of the seniors, and they received a letter from the IRS.
Oh, I remember that one, yes. What's the update?
Well, the update is I called my mother, and I should have called her first before I called your show. She said she was flicking through the news channels, and she caught something about it was something with the hearings and everything on this IRS scandal. And she couldn't remember what news channel she'd seen it on, but they said something about they were digging into your religious affiliations and if you what religion you are and if you believe in God or Allah or this or that or and I says, oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to correct that so there's no misinformation coming out of your show.
I appreciate that, and yes, you're absolutely correct. The questions that were being asked by the IRS of these targeted conservative groups were very inappropriate. I don't even think in that context they were even planning on really using the information all that much. It's just a way to stall the process by always going back and saying, oh, please clarify this, please clarify that, just to stall them so they don't get their tax-exempt status. And it may be that when the forms came in all filled out and answered, they just went in the shredder right directly. My concern was if they were sending this to individual taxpayers, that really was an alarm. But thank you for calling in and correcting that.
Well, I just don't want any misinformation. I want to save face with your show and myself. So, hey, you got a great gig. Keep it up, buddy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Thank you for the phone call.
Bye-bye.
We're going to go over to Jack in Colorado. Aloha, Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. First-time caller. I've been listening to you for a long time. Listen, I was listening to your last caller about this uninsured and underinsured motorist. In Colorado here, they are combined. So when you buy one, you get the other. Mm-hmm. In my particular case, I was rear-ended about 2.5 years ago, and I was informed by my attorney that the lady that did it possibly skipped the state.
Yes.
So in my particular case, if they can't serve her with this lawsuit, they can ask the court to serve somebody they know, whatever, and or they can serve the insurance company. At that point, the insurance company notifies this woman, hey, we need you to participate in defending against this lawsuit. Mm-hmm. Now, if she decides not to, then I'm pretty much SOL. Then I would have to go after her civilly and attach her wages, attach her property. And this is after I've, racked up, $15,000 in medical bills and, I'm still suffering from pain and all this kind of crap. Mm-hmm. So it's a real bad situation.
Yeah, it is. Once these insurance programs became mandatory, premiums went up and any pretense at service went down. Before auto insurance was mandatory, the insurance companies had to take care of you. They had to have a reputation of taking care of their customers. They had to compete with each other in terms of the premiums. And you got decent service for the money that you gave them. Once it became mandatory, the attitude of the insurance companies was, well, you got to buy it from somebody, and we're setting the prices all the same level, and we're all setting our payouts and behavior the same way. So you really don't have any choice, and the rest is just advertising to try and lure people back and forth. Now, in my case, I don't actually remember if I had uninsured motorist on my policy because this was just after it had become mandatory, and in theory there were no uninsured motorists. I was very lucky. I did not suffer any physical injury in my accident. I had a Volkswagen Beetle, and it literally got re-kitted on the highway. I got this Chevy came across the divider on Azusa Avenue and hit me in the driver's headlight, and the energy, I guess, just went into rotation because I remember the car literally spinning around 4 times on the road before it came to rest, and the car was completely totaled, completely demolished, lying in they had to take it away in a basket, and just somehow I walked away from it. The only injury I had was I had a scrape on my left elbow. That was it. That was my only injury.
You're very fortunate considering those Beetles have a gas tank right there in front of you.
Yeah, I don't remember where the gas tank was on this. It was a long time ago, but I remember when the paramedics showed up, they said, "Where's the body?" And I said, "Here." And they couldn't believe I was walking around. I mean, it was just this amazing thing. But the person who hit me simply, they had just moved to California, and they turned around and moved out. We couldn't find him, and so I wound up basically, just stuck buying a whole new car again. And I bought a Buick, which was the second biggest mistake after that Nissan Xterra.
Yeah, and of course, if you were to try to find them, or in your case, if you waited for too long, then the statute of limitations runs out for you to actually file a claim against them, and you're screwed anyway.
Yeah.
So, I can understand if a person wants to do their due diligence and work with an insurance company when they're responsible for an accident. I guess in one respect, I can see where uninsured and underinsured motorist compensation or collision insurance would come into play. But in case, I don't know how many people actually skip out, but when
I don't really know. I do know that we have medical coverage for uninsured motorists on our current auto policy. But the whole idea is, why is it even there if this is all supposed to be mandatory? And you're supposed to have proof of insurance, anytime the police pull you over, but they're not really enforcing it. It's just another way to get you to take more of your money and buy things. And by the way, it's a second form of covert taxation. Because the government takes half your money anyway through various taxes and fees and everything. Then they turn around and they order you on what you have to spend the rest of your money on. It's just another form of covert taxation. Now, in other nations that have the same tax rates that we do in the United States, you get stuff for it. You get free education, free medical care, you get good roads, good infrastructure, and all the rest of that. But here in the United States, you're still taxed the same amount as those other countries, but then you're expected to pay for your own higher education, going into debt to do that, pay for your own medical care. That's now mandatory. And so it's a double whammy that is the reason why so many Americans are just barely getting by. And we're hearing all this talk about, you're going to have to buy this now, and we're going to make you buy that, and you're going to have this. And it's just another way to force us to give money to political cronies. But we have run out. And that's why it's all locking up and coming to an absolute standstill. There is no more money out here for the money junkies to grab. Unless somebody somewhere realizes they got to start pumping it back into America. If you want to make money off of America, you have to start by putting money into America.
Well, not only that, but these taxes that you pay, I don't know what percentage it was. I used to know, but a good percentage of that actually goes into the military-industrial complex to fight these proxy wars and these wars in various countries that actually haven't signed onto the IMF. So it's a huge problem.
It's more than half of all the federal taxes going in there. And, of course, now, as we reported yesterday, it turns out that all these tax loopholes for the 1% actually take more money out of the tax revenues than the wars are costing. So it's a double whammy. We're paying these taxes, we're paying for the war, the money junkies are off scot-free getting rich. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Jack. We'll be back with more calls. America, welcome back to the show here. And a listener just sent in an interesting question. If you're supposed to be buying this hugely expensive Obamacare health insurance policy, if you can't afford to buy one, the IRS fines you on your tax return. If you can't pay that, they issue a lien. You could literally lose your house because you are not able to buy this new, more expensive health insurance you're being ordered to buy. It really is just falling apart around us here. We're going to go back to the phones. Bill in Texas. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you. You guys are talking about auto insurance. I move around a lot because of the work I do, and I'm pretty sure it was California. An illegal alien from, the old Soviet Union, I forget the country, Armenia, that's where he was from, didn't have a driver's license, T-boned me, and, of course, didn't have insurance, and totaled my car, and they had no-fault insurance, and basically your insurance covers you, and it's up to the other person to have insurance to cover them, and if they don't, they're on their own. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a good program. Your insurance is for you, and I got my car fixed. I had my little medical stuff taken care of, and it was all under my own insurance policy.
Well, the problem with no-fault insurance was the same problem with no-fault divorce. The lawyers all of a sudden realized they were losing a huge amount of their business because they weren't going to go into court and yell and scream at each other over where the blame was going to go and who should be paying. And that's the reason why literally the legal industry was opposed to no-fault anything all along, and that's why it's kind of faded away. And when you remember that a large number of legislators began as lawyers, they tend to be biased to craft the laws of the nation in a way where future young lawyers or their old law firms are going to get more business out of it.
There was something in there, if it was over a certain amount and it was the other person's fault, then you can go for it. But as long as it was within your insurance coverage, then they didn't care whose fault it was.
Well,
but anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. That might be an alternative to consider.
Well, I think it's a good alternative, and it was a good idea, but it made the lawyers unhappy because it cut into their billable hours in the courtrooms. And that's kind of why it sort of went away here. Nobody wants the low-cost option for the American people. Nobody wants low-cost solutions to problems like car accidents. Nobody wants inexpensive medications. Nobody wants low-cost housing. Remember what I've said before. I mean, if housing costs $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 and you could pay it off in just 5 years, you're of no more use to the bankers. The bankers need housing prices to be as high as possible in order to plunge you that much deeper into the debt slavery. Nobody in power, nobody in the economic system wants affordable anything. They want the prices to go up because it maximizes their profitability. That is also fascism.
Well, like they don't want you to build your own homes nowadays. I know this one guy, he built his own home. Mm-hmm. He found a piece of land and hired the contractors himself. He got everything done for like $40-some thousand.
That's right.
So where's that markup going? Into the pocket of somebody.
Well, the markup generally is the previous owner of the house is, taking all of the interest he paid on his mortgage and saying, if I'm going to make money back on this thing, I have to recoup all the interest I paid to the bankers. So the reason housing prices continue to skyrocket in a healthy economy is everybody is passing that interest burden forward. But it's mostly the bank. The physical house and land just really doesn't cost all that much. The bank makes more money off that house than the people who built the house or owned the land. When you calculate all the accrued interest payments on your mortgage, the bank gets most of your work product benefit. And all they did was type some numbers into a computer for it.
Well, it's at least 2-3 times what they're selling it to you for is what you pay.
Yes, that's exactly right. And then when you sell it, you try and sell it for that price you paid plus all the bank interest, in order to get your money back. But the bankers do not want inexpensive housing. Remember when the housing market crashed following the collapse of the mortgage-backed security bubble, they were openly talking about needing to bulldoze some of these foreclosed houses because they had to keep them off the market, so that housing prices wouldn't fall, because then people would start buying inexpensive housing and be able to pay off the loan on that house after just a few years like a car loan. And the bankers are absolutely opposed to that possibility. They want you on the debt hook for your entire life. That's what the word mortgage means. It comes from two root words, mort, meaning death, and gage, meaning a promise or a pledge. Your mortgage is your promise to work and give your money to the bank over your entire working lifetime, 30 years, for their permission to move into this house.
And then they fib to you about how you can't get out early, but in Florida and Texas, you only have to pay the remaining balance, and you don't have to pay any penalty, but they try to pretend. We don't know about that law. I went through that in Florida.
Oh, there was a case
you just owe the principal.
There was a case just a couple of weeks ago where a guy tried to pay off his mortgage early, and the bank foreclosed on him because of that. I mean, it's all geared to the money junkies, and nobody at all is out there thinking about what's good for the nation and its people. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsor. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones, I need to mention this. USA Today is now reporting that the official magazine of Al-Qaeda Inspire has put out a special issue in which they claim responsibility for convincing the Tsarnaev brothers to carry out the Boston bombing, yada, 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 and warning of more lone wolf attacks inside the United States. Now, Inspire is a propaganda fraud. Think back to the 1960s COINTELPRO operation and the Black Panther coloring book. This is just more of the same thing. Government creates this and puts it out there to say, see how bad these evil people are. And how do we know Inspire is a fraud? Well, because their issue number 10 featured Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, on their cover. And Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, is a phony. His real name is Adam Perlman. He's the grandson of one of the founding members of the ADL. Just like Yusuf al-Khattab, who ran the Revolution Muslim website up in Brooklyn, New York, and his real name is Joseph Cohen. It's all fakery. This Al-Qaeda magazine is another hoax to convince you, oh, you've got to hate these people over here. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. I forget the lyrics from Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. There's a song, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught, that was all about being raised to hate the people you're supposed to hate, whether you know them or not. I'm going to go back to the phones here. Don in California. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Are you guys still talking about the insurance, car insurance stuff?
Well, we're kind of jumping around all over the place here, but if you want to talk about car insurance, go ahead.
Okay, well, I just wanted to relate a little thing that happened to me here in Fresno, California about, 8-9 years ago. It's been a while, but my youngest daughter turned 16. I bought her a new sports car. It wasn't new, but new to her. And I won't go into why I did it, but the very, very day she got it, she was in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And the car ended up being about $12,000 damage. The car that hit her was an old 50s Chevy truck. The driver didn't have his lights on, didn't have a driver's license, didn't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason they were there when the police got there is because the truck was hung up in my daughter's car. And nobody was hurt, not even a scratch. So anyway, my daughter comes home. I think obviously that she was showing off to her friends, and I'm mad, and And 2 days later, the insurance company, I notified them, of course, and I was insured with one company for my home, my car, everything, for a total of like $350,000.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells me he investigated the scene in the accident, and he assured me that my daughter was not at fault.
Yes.
And he told me that, we'll just give it a day or so, and he says, those two guys, the driver and the passenger, are both have an attorney, and they'll, file suit for, neck braces or something. And I go, what? I said, you're going to fight it, aren't you? And he goes, oh, hell no. He says, we'll pay them off. And it panicked me. I go, are you crazy? Are you going to, and he goes, oh, no. He says, we'll keep it down to around $8-10 $10,000, a lot cheaper than going to court.
Yeah.
And their attorney will know that. And he says, this is the way we do it. Don't worry about it. And I was between being shocked, mad. I could not believe that's what it was just matter of course, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's all decided by lowest cost option, playing by all these rules, and it's all about the money and taking care of the people. It's just not a factor. And as we sink deeper and deeper into fascism, where government completely abandons its role as arbitrator between the needs of the people and the needs of business, these abuses are going to escalate.
Well, if I'm paying insurance, I'm doing by the rules, and the guy that didn't do any of that made out like a bandit.
It happens sometimes. It happens sometimes. I
just, I'll never forget it. And luckily, that's the only time I'm like you. I've ever used the insurance, but still, I just thought I'd relate that. It's a little bit different slant on it, and I totally agree with you, Mike.
Well, there's another factor that people need to be aware of when they're dealing with insurance companies, whether it's auto insurance, home insurance, whatever. Insurance companies are usually centerpieces of larger financial institutions where they will take all that money they're getting on the premiums and they will invest it in various investments, and out of those investments that they're making money on is where they get the money to basically pay their salaries and their the premiums. But as the economy tightens and the investments start to fail, then these insurance companies will turn around and say, oh, we need higher rates, we need to cut back on payouts simply to stay in the black. And so as the economy deteriorates, that too, it puts pressure on insurance companies to find reasons to not honor claims. And I went through that, like I said, I bought an extended warranty on this piece of crud Nissan Xterra, made in Tennessee, and when the engine exploded, the engine had its own warranty because it had already been replaced once. And the insurance company said, oh no, the engine failed because something failed in the other part of the car that's no longer covered, and it, simply denied coverage. And at that point, I junked that Xterra, and I got this little 12-year-old Honda, 13-year-old Honda I'm driving around now. And it's showing its age, but it's a great little car. I absolutely love this Honda. I'm for the rest of my life, Hondas or nothing else. I'm not interested in Mercedes. I'm not interested in Bugatti Veyrons. I'm not interested in anything made in America. I just absolutely love these Hondas. Every Honda we've had has been wonderful.
Mike, I've had Hondas too, and let's see, 13 years ago, in 2003, I bought a Ford Focus. Mm-hmm. And back then, the reason I bought it was I needed a little car for in town here. But it was Ford, and I said, I'm going to buy American. Mm-hmm. I had that patriotic thing going.
Yeah.
And, I probably had the car a couple, 3 weeks, and I noticed a little sticker on the door, and it was made in Nicaragua. I was so...
Well, let's see. In my life, this turned into Top Gear West over here, but I had a Ford Econoline van. The engine caught fire and burned. I had a Chevy where the electric window quit working right in the middle of the Southern California storm season. The reason I bought the Xterra is I'd had a positive memory about this Nissan Maxima that I'd had, but then I forgot. I never really drove it all that long because when my first wife and I broke up, she got the Maxima and wrapped it around a tree. And so forth and so on. I've never really had an American car that I was happy with. And after I lost my Buick, after I lost my Volkswagen to the accident, I bought a Buick, and like I said, that was the second worst automobile purchase in my life after that Xterra. So I'm just going to play it safe and stick with the Hondas.
I have to tell you, the little Focus, I've had it all that time, and it has never let me down. Not cost me a dime.
Sometimes you get them, and that's a really good thing that you do. But this Honda is holding up. It's been 13 years. Our last Honda was an Accord. We drove it for 17 years before it reached the point where we said, it's really time to think about getting a new car. And actually, the reason we this is a funny story, and then I got to let you go because we've got other stuff coming up here. The reason we got rid of the Honda Accord and we got the Xterra was I had bought my wife a much larger harp. She plays harp, Celtic harp, and when I'd met her, it was a little tiny harp that we could put in the back seat of the Honda Accord. And then I got her this much larger Celtic harp. It's only slightly smaller than your traditional concert harp. And so we needed a large car to take the harp around where she was going to play, and also I needed a larger car because I was working on Lost, and I had a lot of gear I needed to take to the various locations with me, and that's why we got the Xterra. And, just nothing but nonstop problems. Electrical system failed, alternator failed, transmission problems, 2 engines, and it was just a horrible idea.
You don't have a lemon law in Hawaii?
I should have looked into it, but in this particular case, I'm just going to buy Hondas and know that I'm going to be taken care of.
The difference between a Honda and most American cars, in my experience, is when a Honda breaks down, it's an oddity. When an American car breaks down, it's par for the course.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's really cool about Honda is they're a little bit less into the planned obsolescence than American cars. And when you have an older Honda, you can go out and get replacement parts for it from like 3 model years before or after, because they're not changing everything constantly. Anyway, we've talked enough about cars. We're not a car show. And Don, I'm going to let you go here because we need to get back to some of the economic news. We're going to talk about gold, and basically the London Bullion Market Association is now reporting that gold transactions are at an all-time record high. And what has happened is this artificially lowered prices to try and keep people in the stock market, keep people in their savings accounts, get them to even sell some of their physical gold so the George Soros and the private central banks can grab it. It's backfired. Now that prices are down on gold and silver, people are trying to get hold of the physical as much as they can. Again, Republic Trading Group, if you buy your gold from them, 2 things are going to happen. 1, you're going to get value for your money. 2, part of that purchase price does go to support the Republic Broadcasting Network. Alrighty, now apparently the United States Senate has introduced an updated version of the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, what this is all about, in the wake of the Depression of the 1930s, which was triggered by the stock market crash of 1929, Congress passed a law, Glass-Steagall, which said that depositor banks and investment banks could not commingle, could not get into each other's business. And the reasoning was very simple. Depositor banks, where you put your money in your savings or checking account, were constrained to only invest in very reliable, secure, low-return investments. Investment banks, which are basically a group of private wealthy people operating together, they were allowed to go into these high-risk ventures, which would also, if they worked out, generate a much higher return. And it was the commingling of those two businesses in the 1920s that led to this runaway practice of speculating recklessly with depositors' funds, which is why so many banks failed and led to this huge depression in the 1930s. So they passed the Glass-Steagall Act, and all was well with the world until 1999, when the Congress repealed Glass-Steagall. And immediately you saw all these mergers taking place where you had investment groups and depositors' banks under the same roof, and they started playing recklessly with depositors' money, including the mortgage-backed security fraud. And so now here we are 14 years later, and the damage is already done. And now Congress is going to go, harumph, harumph, I guess we should go back to Glass-Steagall. Actually, you should have gone back to Glass-Steagall in 2000, when it was already obvious that the banks and Wall Street firms had gone right back to the same reckless behavior that led to the crash of 29. But you know, those Wall Street firms, they write really, really fat campaign donations, and you don't want to upset them. You don't get to run for, you don't get to win elected office in the United States if you alienate the Federal Reserve and their buddies. So now that the damage is done and America's economy is destroyed, Congress is going to act like they're still relevant by trying to pass a new Glass-Steagall, and I wouldn't bet more than a plugged Turkish piastre it's actually going to get anywhere. It's just grandstanding. They're already starting to think about, oh, we've got to be able to say we did this and that going into next year's elections. And that's what's driving this whole thing. Now, in North Carolina, their legislature is considering a bill to charge a separate extra fee for drivers of hybrid cars, under the theory that because they are not buying as much gasoline, they are not paying as much in gasoline taxes, and we can't let that money go away. So now owners of hybrid cars in North Carolina are going to be assessed a fee so that the state government still gets their money, which kind of undermines the whole idea of getting a hybrid to save money, because your savings are going to be taken away by these actions. And it's not just with the hybrid cars. We see it with the public utilities. We're always being told, oh, conserve water, conserve electricity, you know, get rid of the tungsten bulbs, buy compact fluorescents or buy LED bulbs. And your electric usage goes down, and what does the electric company do? They raise the rates. So your electric bill remains the same, and you're getting less service. And that, too, is life under fascism here. Now, we're seeing this situation where a couple of these letters with ricin in them were sent to the Obama White House and to New York Mayor Bloomberg, and the envelopes and letters contained references regarding gun rights, gun owners. And MSNBC is already out there trying to use these two letters to demonize all gun rights activists. Now, we know this Kokesh armed march into D.C. was a golden opportunity to bash gun rights activists and gun owners. Oh, they're dangerous. They're threatening the government. They're carrying guns into the nation's capital. It was obviously a setup. We all called Kokesh on it. He's now canceled it. And now they're on to Plan B, sending these phony letters. They're no more genuine than the anthrax letters that followed 9/11. And MSNBC is out there leading the propaganda thing. Oh, see, these gun activists, they're dangerous. They're dealing in these poisons. They're out back pounding castor beans right now to poison us all. And that's going to be a really tough sell, because even if there really was a gun rights activist making ricin in his kitchen and sending it to Obama and to Bloomberg, it's just one guy, maybe two guys. It's a real leap to try and make a link between the behavior of these two guys, one or two or three guys, whoever it is, and the 80% of American people who own firearms. But they're trying to do it anyway. Meanwhile, of course, tomorrow, actually today, Richard Mack's Constitutional Sheriff's Convention has cranked up, and they're focusing on these two issues of the Second Amendment, right to keep and bear arms, and states' rights. So if you're anywhere near St. Charles, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, you might want to think about going on over there today or tomorrow and step in and say hi to everybody and show your support. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Dan is now sitting in our control room answering the phones when you call into 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Apparently, Cornell University is working on a research program to develop a robotic bartender that knows when you need a new beer and the rest of it. I don't think it's really going to work. Half the fun of going to a bar is dumping whatever your problems are on the bartender. And the bartender stands there and goes, I know, I know, I know. Now, thanks to our ever-alert crew in the RBN control room, they got those lyrics for that song I was talking about. Back when we were talking about this Al-Qaeda magazine Inspire being an obvious propaganda device to get you to hate the Muslims and think evil thoughts about them. And it was reminding me about Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. And there's a song in there that's really quite insightful. And the lyrics go, let's see. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is of a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8. To hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And that was a very brilliant piece of writing from the stage play later the movie South Pacific. And that's exactly what it is. Our government spends vast sums of money to convince you that you must hate these people over here, but you must love and unquestioningly support these other people over there. They don't dare allow you to decide for yourself who is good and who is evil. The sheer volume of effort they're putting into these campaigns reveals they know if you were allowed to decide for yourself, you wouldn't hate the people who are being invaded. And you wouldn't love and stand by the people doing the invading. Now, getting back to the gun rights issue, we're finding out yet another police department, this one up in Chicago, when they are done with their little gun buyback program where they'll go out in the community and say guns are bad, guns lead to crime, they're dangerous, you don't want them, and they'll buy the guns from the citizenry for a very small amount of money. Sometimes bags of groceries is what they're trading for the guns. They turn around, the police turn around and sell the guns for a profit to local gun dealers. And they're coming out and saying, you know, there's value in these guns. You know, it's a bottom line issue. These police gun buyback programs are money-making opportunities for the police. They're pillaging the population for guns and then turning around and selling them to dealers, and the dealers sell them back out onto the streets. It's a scam. It's another scam here. Now, over in St. Louis, and it's interesting that this is happening at the same time as Richard Mack's convention, there are protesters in St. Louis over the fact that the St. Louis police shot this black honor student 25 times. And again, what the police are saying and what the witnesses are saying don't exactly line up. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're dealing with this very ugly police shooting that happened in St. Louis. And the police story is that this 25-year-old honor student refused to pull over when ordered to do so by the police. Then he got out of his car with a gun, pointing the gun at the police, and they had to open fire to defend themselves 25 times. 7 of the shots hit this kid in the back. Now, the witnesses are saying that the kid did pull over the car, and when he got out of the car, he threw his gun on the ground and put his hands up so that there was no misunderstanding, and the cops still plugged him. Now, I know that the cops are overreactive if you don't do what you're told at the very instant you are told to do it. And I remember a while back, this was in Los Angeles, not here in Hawaii. Cops here in Hawaii are pretty cool for the most part. And I was driving along on the freeway, on a section of LA freeway where there really was no shoulder. And police car came behind me, flashed on the lights, and I put my hand out of the car and indicated the off-ramp. And I drove down the off-ramp and pulled off to the side and parked there with the cop car behind me. And he's screaming, "Why didn't you pull over? Why didn't you pull over?" And I said, "Well, because there was no shoulder." And I saw that, police video where the cop got hit by a truck because there was no clearance. And this guy was just ranting and raving. And it turned out he'd misread my license plate. And he'd radioed in, and they said, "Oh, this guy's wanted for tearing tags off his couch cushion," or something nonsense like that. And he had to let me go. I hadn't done anything. But this guy was just screaming at the top of his voice that I didn't stop exactly when he told me to stop, when it was clearly an unsafe situation. And I didn't accelerate. I didn't race away. I used the turn signal to indicate I'm getting off the freeway, and I signaled with the arm signal I'm getting off the freeway. And the guy just went completely ballistic. They got to be on drugs over there. Now, apparently, over in Coral Springs, they had a problem with a police officer who basically was, how can I put this delicately? I don't want to lose the radio license on this station here. He was gratifying himself physically in public in front of a woman at a gas station. And the woman that he was exposing himself to complained, and it turned out this guy had a long record of doing this, of just pulling up his cop car where there was a cute girl, getting out, unzipping, and going, "Whoa, whoa." And so now he's resigned before he could be fired, which means he's on his way to some other city to apply for a police position there. Over in Boca Raton, you're going to love this one. Police officer had to resign when his wife was arrested for running a prostitution ring. And the police officer, 9-year veteran of the Boca Raton Police Department, is out there saying he had no idea what his wife was doing. There's a real confidence builder about the police department. Guy's living with a woman, running a prostitution ring, and didn't have any suspicion at all what she was doing. Just gets weirder and weirder over there. Over at 12160.info, apparently 21-year-old woman was sleeping on a beach, got run over by a police patrol car. Just driving down the beach, not paying attention where he was going, ran over the woman. She survived. She's in the hospital. See, over in St. Clair County, we have a judge facing heroin and gun charges. He's had to resign. The whole system is messed up. The criminals are all wearing the badges and the funny-looking robes. No wonder they want to take the guns away from us. It's going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, Oklahoma recently got savaged by major tornadoes, especially in the town of Moore. Canadian relief organizations sent 20,000 kilograms of food, blankets, and other supplies to aid the people of Moore dealing with this tragedy. It hasn't reached them yet. It got stopped at the U.S.-Canada border in Windsor, Ontario. American customs officials are saying they will not allow any of this material into the United States to go to the disaster area until every item in the shipment is itemized in alphabetical order and the paperwork is filled out regarding the country of origin of everything in the shipment. And, of course, by the time all of this paperwork is done on all of this stuff, most of it will have perished. What are these customs officials thinking? This is a natural disaster that has hit American citizens. Canada's trying to help. It's not like these pallets came in from Iran. What are these guys thinking? There are people down there in Moore who are going hungry. They are cold. They're trapped in the rain. There's not a lot of support coming down there. FEMA's got, at best, a token presence, and there are more tornadoes coming in now. And the customs officials are saying, no, we're not going to let the food and emergency supplies get down there until this huge stack of paper gets filled out. And by the time that all gets done, a lot of what is in the shipment, the food items, will perish. That border station does not have a giant refrigerated warehouse to keep all of this stuff from perishing while it gets sorted through and alphabetized. What are they thinking? Have we become a nation of people that can look no further than their own immediate nose at what's going on in the world? I thought the TSA were completely over-the-top morons with some of the stuff they're doing. This takes the cake. Canada is trying to help Americans who are not being adequately helped by their own government. And the government says, no, you cannot bring this stuff in here until you fill out the forms. There must be the paperwork here. You have to fill out all the paperwork. Your papers are not in order. You may not help our people. Just absolutely absurd that this happened. Now, earlier in the week, the corporate media was making a big deal about 2 U.S. diplomats, and that word has to be in quotes, who were shot at a Venezuela strip club. And they were saying, oh, those Venezuelans, they're shooting at American diplomats here. And they were basically their military attachés assigned to the U.S. Embassy in the capital. Witnesses say these two got into a fight and shot each other. That's a good representative of the American people to be seen in foreign countries. All right, now, of course, as you're probably already aware, President Obama is making all these sentences about the need for internet surveillance, and we've got to be watching everything that you're doing, and we can't be bothered with all this Bill of Rights and warrants and all this other stuff. It's just way too much of an inconvenience. Yeah, it is. That was the intention. The reason the Founding Fathers set up the Constitution and the Bill of Rights the way they did is so that the government would not have access to your private life unless they knew they had a good enough reason to justify going through due process, going to a judge, getting a warrant that specifies exactly what they're looking for and where they will look. It's designed to be inconvenient to the federal government. And now Obama's out there saying, we can't be bothered. Yeah, you'd better be bothered. Your authority as president rests on that Constitution. If you don't want to follow the rules, please have the grace to resign. Not that I would appreciate Biden in the Oval Office anymore. But that's the message we have to send to the entire federal government. That Constitution is the original contract with America. It is the agreement under which we, the people, allow the federal government to manage the nation for us. And if that government does not want to abide by that contract, they are free to resign. And they ought to. We know they won't, but they ought to. Alrighty, let's see what else is going on here. Facebook has come under fire over a continuing pattern of censorship, both of posts and entire accounts that are critical of the Obama administration. And apparently, Zuckerberg and his other investors in Facebook have been lobbying for an increase in the H-1B visas in the immigration reform bill. This would allow high-tech companies like Facebook to hire, import high-tech foreign workers at a tiny fraction of the cost that they would have to pay if they hired all these new college graduates who just graduated with $100,000 in debt. And so Zuckerberg is trying to suck up to the Obama administration, and they're going to keep Facebook an Obama criticism-free zone. Another reason to stop even using Facebook. Oh, my goodness here. Another interesting article, this is from the Trenches World Report, on surging disinformation analysts pouring into various websites to emotionalize and antagonize. We call them online shills or trolls, and we know they're hired by various entities. The Foreign Ministry of Israel hires Israeli students living in the United States of America to spend their free time on their computers going into websites like, well, whatreallyhappened.com, and push Israel's agenda and scream anti-Semite at anybody who dares criticize Israel. Public relations firms openly advertise that for a fee, they will put people on various websites and discussion boards to push the client's agenda. Hill and Knowlton makes a huge amount of money doing this thing, to hire people to pretend to be just plain folks and go on out there and push the corporate agenda. We saw a lot of these during the debate about Proposition 37. We continue to see it on the issue of GMO. It's called grassroots lobbying, and it's kind of a weird twist in the lobbying laws that when a lobbyist approaches a politician, they must wear an identification that says, I am a lobbyist for thus and such corporation. But lobbyists who are deployed against the population are legally allowed to conceal that that is what they are. Meanwhile, we're seeing this debate start to grow about whether online sources of news are to be considered news organizations protected by the First Amendment. And it's gone back and forth several times. The courts have said online sources of news, the independent media, they are media. And they should have the same legal protections as the corporate media. But apparently last Sunday, Illinois Senator Democrat Dick Durbin is out there saying, oh, no, those bloggers, they don't deserve constitutional protection. They're going to unofficial sources, and they're not following the party line, and therefore, if they're not going to basically toe the line for the government's political agenda, then the government shouldn't grant them any constitutional protections. We're going to start seeing this escalate. Between Obama's talk about online surveillance, between Durbin's comments, clearly the U.S. government and the corporate media understand they have lost the ability to lie to the American people and the people of the world with impunity. They're openly talking about mounting their own domestic online propaganda operation, spending your tax dollars to lie to you, to overwhelm and outshout anybody in the independent media who is asking any questions about what the government is doing. Now, I have a lot of faith in those of you listening to this show and reading our websites. I know that when presented with propaganda versus facts, you'll figure it out for yourself. Propaganda only works when there are no voices pointing out the problems. Back in the 1950s and the 1960s, the government could lie about everything and get away with it. Corporate media would feed it out to you. And those who knew the government was lying did not have access to the rest of the nation. That has completely changed. And finally now, all these years afterwards, apparently the government and the corporate media have figured this out. And they're trying to figure out some way they can go back to those glory days of the Cold War where they could make up any ridiculous nonsense at all, like torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. And Americans would have no choice but to believe the story and say, yes, we must go to war in Vietnam. Here, take my sons, put them into Vietnam, send them home in an aluminum box. Now, over at rinth.com, they're talking about this massive new National Security Agency data center that's been built in Utah that is basically plugged into every internet, every cell phone company, all around the world, regardless of the country you reside in. It's sort of the up-to-date 21st century version of the Echelon system. And supposedly this whole facility is codenamed Bumble Hive. It's cost almost $2 billion, and it can store 1 trillion terabytes of information. And it sounds impressive. But I'd like to see anybody go through all these terabytes of information and come up with anything useful. Look at all the embarrassments coming out of the fusion centers with their much smaller databases. Bumble Hive is a boondoggle. They're not going to be able to get anything meaningful out of there. And remember, they scan Facebook for intelligence information. Do you know how many people lie about themselves on Facebook? We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And the corporate media is just reporting on this Louisiana state senator who has, and by the way, I told you this was going to happen, has gone public saying that opponents to Obamacare are only opponents because they hate the black president. It's racism. They're racists if they're opposing Obamacare. And that's the only reason they would have any concern about all this stuff. Boy, they're getting pretty desperate when they get out to that whole thing. Getting back to the situation with Facebook, and again, you do need to be careful with what you put on the Internet. It's almost impossible to get it back, as the government has learned to its chagrin over the years, and it will follow you. It has become a common practice among a lot of large businesses in the United States. When you apply for a job there, they will go out and find you on Facebook to look at how you live your private life to see if you conform to their model of morality and the rest of it. Back when I was still in visual effects and I did hire people from time to time, I would never even think of doing that sort of thing. I mean, when you're hiring people into a creative enterprise, especially, they're going to be living creative lives. And if I ever were to look at their Facebook page, it was just to say, hey, these are cool people. And I wouldn't judge somebody's work performance based on their Facebook. But, you know, a lot of people will put up things in a moment of exuberance or intoxication that they'll take away. Facebook has announced a new policy. If you put up a photo on Facebook and you have second thoughts about it, they will now delete it for a fee. You can put it up there for free, but if you are embarrassed and you want to take it back down, they're going to charge you for it. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Now, down in New Zealand, the case of Mega Upload and Kim.com. The police went in when he was, Mega Upload was accused of copyright violations, and they confiscated everything. All the computers, all of the drives, everything. They just cleaned it all out and took it away. The New Zealand High Court has now said it was unlawful for the police to simply take everything, and they cannot keep any materials that are not relevant to the case they were trying to bring against Mega Upload. And the New Zealand government has now ordered the police to take it all back and put it back where they found it at their own cost. Now, obviously, content piracy is an issue. Dan in the control room says they even took his Xbox. And this kind of overreaching police response has got to stop. And the New Zealand High Court is saying, yeah, the police did not have a right to take materials not germane to the case itself. And they're going to make the police take it back at their own expense. And so Mega Upload is going to be up and running again, because they do a lot of sharing of data that's not protected by anybody's copyright. But of course, from the Record Industry Association of America and the Motion Picture Association of America, they want anybody that's even suspected of trafficking in these copyrighted materials, they want them shut down completely. It's not law enforcement, it's punishment. Trying to make an example, and now this one's blown up in their face. And again, I do not support content piracy, putting an entire piece of music or movie up on your website without permission. That is wrong. We try and stay within the confines of the fair use doctrine here in the United States of America. We've been seeing that recently in these cases where police are confiscating cameras of citizens who are filming the police engaged in some of the less attractive behavior. And the police do have authority to ask you for a copy of your pictures and videos. But as we saw just a couple of weeks ago, the police are physically taking the cameras and cell phones and then erasing them before they hand them back. And that is definitely outside the law for them to do. Under the copyright law, as it is in the country right now, if you take a picture with your cell phone or camera, there is already a copyright in existence on it that you own. The registration of copyright through the Library of Congress is merely to document authorship in the case of an eventual dispute. But you can simply say, everything in this camera is my copyrighted property, and I give you permission to copy it. But if the police take that memory card or camera or cell phone and they erase it, they're stealing your intellectual property, and you should sue. Now, over in Ohio, and we're coming up on another election next year, which is going to be just about as fraudulent. Remember, up in Canada, the courts have ruled their last election that put the Harper government in power was fraudulent. Completely stolen election. They've been going back and looking at Ohio, which was one of the battleground states between Obama and Romney, and they have discovered that 20% of the registered voters in Ohio are fraudulent registrations. And Obama's margin over Romney in Ohio was just 3%. Did Obama steal Ohio? Yeah, maybe. We need to know. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And back in the category of extreme overreaction to trivial things, we're hearing about this kid who had a cap gun at his school, and he was like grilled by the teachers for 2 hours until he wet himself, and only then did they call the parents. And in the category of overreaction, earlier in the week, somebody inside Disneyland, as a prank, set off a dry ice bottle bomb, which is simply you take one of these plastic bottles that water or soda pop come in, you crush up some dry ice and throw it in there, then you quickly fill it with water and cap it. And the water will melt the dry ice and the carbon dioxide will build up until the bottle ruptures, and it makes a pretty hefty little boom sound. And at the time, I pointed out, because of the intense TSA-like scrutiny that you have to go through to get into Disneyland. At least as of the last time my wife and I wanted to go to Disneyland, and then when we saw how people were being abused, we turned around and went over to Knott's Berry Farm. I said it was going to have to be an inside job, and it turned out, yeah. Guy working inside, just for a laugh, was going to set off a bottle bomb. It's misdemeanor vandalism at best. And he's being held in jail on $1 million bail. At the same time, when these Wall Street CEOs who destroyed our entire nation's economy have not even been arrested. And it is an overreaction. I don't think it was smart what he did. I don't agree with what he did. I think it was a dumb thing to do. But it is a misdemeanor. Write him a ticket and let him go. It may be that this thing going boom was an embarrassment to Disneyland, because the guests into Disneyland were putting up with all this going through purses and backpacks and crotch grabbing, because the happiest place on earth would be safe. And the reality is that if somebody really wanted to carry out a terror attack on Disneyland, all those uniformed perverts at the front gate aren't going to stop them. Meanwhile, let's see, Obama has appointed a former Monsanto vice president to be the new food safety czar. A guy who made his fortune in GMO is now going to be the authority over what is safe or not safe to eat in the United States of America. And we have already seen this campaign to declare small farmers' markets with naturally, organically grown food to be unsafe because they're not going through the FDA and USDA inspections, even though most of those inspectors are now on furlough because of sequestration. And we're going to see this agenda of declaring natural, healthy, organic food to be unsafe, but you should go over and buy this chemical concoction coming out of this industrial plant. And trust us, it's going to be safe. Now, meanwhile, over in North Carolina, they are proposing legislation that would make it a crime to expose how Monsanto and other corporations are threatening public health and the environment. It's Senate Bill 648. They're calling it simply the Commerce Protection Act, and it makes it illegal for whistleblowers to come out and say Monsanto's products are causing harm. That is truly fascism on display, because we know these products cause harm. It's been proven in foreign countries. Now, the good news is that apparently, faced with the rising tide of outright bans and the deliberate destruction of GMO crops, Hungary is literally burning the fields where GMO corn was being grown to get rid of the pollen. In France, they are literally trashing vineyards that were experimenting with GMO grapes. Monsanto is backing off trying to force these products onto Europe. Europe said no. And so Monsanto is basically going to come back to the United States, where the government is firmly in their pocket, and say, we'll make our money just forcing everybody to buy our Monsanto products here in the U.S., and denying them any other possible choice. And the backlash against GMO is growing. As reported earlier in the week, a wheat field in Oregon was found to be contaminated with Monsanto's GMO wheat pollen. Now, GMO wheat is not yet approved for sale and use. And somehow the pollen got out there and started contaminating fields. As a result of this, Japan canceled their plan to import wheat from the United States because they don't want these products. And now we are hearing that the European Union is going to start testing incoming shipments of agricultural produce from the United States, and any that contain genetically modified wheat will be blocked, will not be allowed in. This GMO push is turning out to be a disaster, but in the fascist states of America, you will be forced to buy and consume these products, because Monsanto's got to make their money, because they've got to write those campaign donations to Congress. Now, over in Illinois, there's a very, very bizarre story. There has been evidence that is linking bee colony collapse disorder to the bees' exposure to this Bt toxin that is engineered into the some of Monsanto's crops to have an automatic pesticide so you don't need to use more chemicals and so forth. And they found this these bees that were being raised by this scientist who was trying to look into colony collapse disorder. And he's been working at this for years. And he basically had developed bees who were resistant to that Bt toxin in the Monsanto crops. And the Illinois Agricultural Department came in and confiscated all of his bees that are resistant to GMO poison, and they killed the remaining queen bees in the hive so he can't grow any more. And they're saying they needed to do this because these bees were not the standard approved bees and so forth and so on. There's only one reason. Monsanto intended for the bees to die off all along, to put an end to natural organic farming where the bees are pollinizing the crops, so that even farmers who don't want GMO crops will have no choice but to go to Monsanto and buy these genetically modified seeds on credit. They're hideously expensive. And you're not allowed to keep and replant seeds like traditional farming. You must go back and buy more seeds every single year. And as Monsanto finds itself kicked out of Europe, they're going to come back to the fascist states of the United States, and they will force all farmers to use their crops by getting rid of the alternative. For all we know, Monsanto went out deliberately pollinating wheat fields with their GMO wheat. So by the time people started screaming about the problems with GMO wheat, it's too late. All the fields have our pollen. If you don't pay us royalties and residuals and buy our seeds, we'll sue. We'll take your farms away. And a lot of people had wondered if the die-off of the bees were just an accident or if it was part of Monsanto's plan to monopolize food production for the entire planet. And this action by the Illinois Department of Agriculture, where this scientist has developed these bees who are immune to these GMO toxins, and they take the bees and destroy the queens. This guy was on the verge of solving the colony collapse disorder problem, and they destroyed his work. If you can come up with another explanation for the motive, do call on in and share it with me. But as far as I can see, the only reason to destroy a colony of bees who have been developed to be resistant to GMO toxins is to make sure that all the other bees eventually succumb to GMO toxins. That's the only reason I can think of that makes any sense at all. Amazing, amazing. Greed just rules everything in this country. And I'm very alarmed at the very reckless way this GMO technology, which is the most dangerous technology the humans have ever played with. We're playing with the very code that controls our life. And as soon as they find a little trick, they slap a sticker on it, and they put it in the store, and they get it out there, and they make their money. And it's very reckless to be playing with this stuff this way. The possibility of triggering an extinction-level event is obviously present there, especially with the epicite gene. Now, I just got a reminder from our control room that Republic Broadcasting is still in the middle of their fundraising drive, and they are within, I presume it's $5,000, to reach the fundraising goal. This is John Stadmiller's 1,000 ounce of silver pledge drive, and you don't have to donate silver. You can go over to the Republic Broadcasting website. You can hit their little donate button. You can send checks. You can get the address out of the little contact button at the Republic Broadcasting website. If you buy your silver and gold from Republic Trading Group, that also goes in to help supporting what we're doing out here. Because of Pentagate and all these other things that are exploding, millions of Americans who really were still wearing the blinders, they didn't want to know what was going on because it just disturbed their little comfortable belief sphere, and their bubble has popped, and they're starting to ask the important questions. They're not being distracted by Jodi Arias and Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin and the rest of the other distractions. They're saying, what's going on with this country? What's with all the wars? What's going on with the economy and private central banking? And now is the time for you to all reach in and help us. Reach out to these Americans who are asking these questions and say, come on over here. We've got the answers. Thomas Jefferson said it's the highest duty of every American citizen to keep themselves fully informed so they can make good choices. And if there was ever a time in our history for Americans to start making good choices, it's today. We need your help to do it. RBN does not get huge corporate funding. We don't have big advertisers who come in to support us just because they like our particular political point of view. We don't get checks with lots of zeros in them from shadowy non-governmental organizations to push a particular agenda. We have the freedom to say what needs to be said. Nobody's in here telling us what stories to do, what stories not to do. Nobody comes in and says, go easy on this group. Follow this lead from the White House talking points. Nobody does that. We're truly a people's network, but it takes the people to keep us going. Thank you for your help. All of those that already donated and helped out, we thank you. We can't do this without you. And we're hoping that our current crisis is going to come out to a good ending for the American people, and when it does, you'll be able to pat yourselves on the back. You'll be able to tell your kids, I was there. I supported this virtual nonviolent revolution that won the country back for your generation. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Maryland. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I guess I was going to talk about the economy, but I guess you heard about Adam Kokesh. He's had second thoughts about the march on D.C. now.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that earlier in the week. He's calling for people to march into the state capitals, but it doesn't look like he's assuming a leadership role in that. And so I think that's going to fizzle. Everybody basically understands our government would love the illusion of a violent revolution that they could brutally put down and suspend the Constitution. Kokesh was going to hand them that. Everybody said it was a bad idea. Oath Keepers said it was a bad idea. Cindy Sheehan, when she was on my show, said it was a bad idea. Gun Owners of America, I think I heard that they came out against it. Alex Jones initially supported it. Then he, to his credit, turned around and said, yeah, bad idea. So this thing has definitely cratered.
Well, I was going to talk about the economy, and I keep hearing crazy stuff about the Japanese government bond market, how it's like on the verge of collapse. And I read the story somewhere, it might have been Zero Hedge, and you read something incredible, and you have to shake your head. Is this true or not, that according to this one article I read, that half of the Japanese tax money goes to pay for the interest on the national debt? I mean, that's just incredible.
Yeah, well, you know, a huge amount of your tax revenue here goes to pay interest on the national debt. We're in the same situation. The Japanese bonds, when they've been trading, they have hit limit down, I think 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and that's a very, very bad sign. And the problem with the Japanese bond market, if the Japanese bonds collapse, investors around the world buying any government bonds are going to start taking a close look at what they're holding. And the problem is here in the United States of America, there is now a huge Treasury bond bubble. The Treasury has issued Treasury bonds to give to the Federal Reserve so the Federal Reserve can turn around and crank out all this money to give to Wall Street, and there are not enough living American taxpayers to ever make good on all these Treasury bonds. So there's a Treasury bond bubble. And if Japan collapses, I expect the United States bond market is going to take a major hit. As it is right now, most newly issued Treasury bonds are being bought by the Federal Reserve itself. They're just shuffling the paper back and forth to make it look like the system is still working.
Well, I listened to this local news station here in Maryland, and the guy talks about the stock market. The stock market was down 200 today, and he was saying how the bonds in this country now are inching ever closer upwards, and he said basically people that are in bonds in a 2-month period have lost the equivalent of 4 years of wealth. So even with this very tenuous creeping up of interest rates in the American bond market, people are starting to lose the rear ends in certain bonds. So it looks like the bond, I could be wrong, I'm not trying to sound like Debbie Downer here, but it looks like ready to burst.
I would agree. I mean, they're holding the whole system together through fraud and illusion and spit and baling wire, and they can't keep it going. They can't keep the gold prices down. They can't keep the stock market propped up forever. In fact, the stock market, the American stock market, took a major clubbing today, and that is very rare because the tradition up until now has been for the plunge protection team to massage the market for a happy ending on Friday, so everybody goes into the weekend relaxed and they come back on Monday and say it's a whole new week, let's keep going. But the Dow ended 208 down, NASDAQ off 35, S&P off 23 for a Friday. That is a major, major downturn. And so, it's basically at the end where the overlapping frauds are starting to erode.
It's like somebody said, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Sooner or later, the thing is going to rise to the surface, you know?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of analogies like that. And, again, at this point, I think it's an even money bet that by the end of this year, the Federal Reserve and the federal government, as we know them today, will be gone, and we better start planning for what kind of a nation and economy we want after that. Got to take a break for commercials. One more phone call when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take one more phone call. Tian's in South Africa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Just something interesting. My brother's passed away, unfortunately, but he was a medical doctor. He was also a doctor of agriculture and had 5 other master's degrees. And we had a friend, and his son, used to farm with GMO maize and that in South Africa, where I think it's Billiton, the big mining company, have sort of bought out all the coal fields in the Transvaal area. And once they dug all that up, the main maize growing area in South Africa for yellow maize will be destroyed. But in the meantime, these people are using GMOs, and he's been warning against this. And so the old man, he sort of went and lived on the farm, and then he set up his own little chicken yard, and he put up chickens, and he wanted them, free range and all this. And they couldn't understand. They kept dying. And when cuts him open, he finds that they're just eating stones and that. And then I sat there one day, I said, it's a GMO, and he went mad. He said, nonsense, you people don't know what you're talking about, making a lot of money out of this stuff. So I said, have you looked around this area? Have you walked around? Just look around, just walk around, take a stick and walk and see, do you see any insect? Do you see anything that these chickens can eat except stones and the food that you give them out of a bag? And you were shocked. And then you realized, then they went and looked around. It kills everything in that vicinity. There's nothing there. The specific maize, yellow maize that they grew there. So if you walk in the veld there, in the grass, in the outside, anywhere around the farm fields, there's not an insect available. The only thing you could ever see on that farm is at nighttime, spiders catching moths, and that's all.
Yeah, we see this all the time. If you're destroying the insect population on your farm, much of your farm stock is supposed to eat that. But again, Monsanto's goal is you buy your life forms from them, you buy the food from them, you buy the seeds from them. It's completely cut off from nature. And we know that livestock raised on GMO corn, it affects their health. Could potentially affect the health of people consuming those products. There's that French study that showed these rats getting all these huge tumors after 4 months of exposure to these products. And in this country, because money is king of all, we're literally being sold not just products that aren't of particularly high quality, we're being sold products that are actually harmful to us. And the government's response is, you don't need to know that, just buy and consume, buy, spend more. It reminds me a lot of THX 1138, where the church was just this photograph of Jesus who just keeps intoning, spend more, buy, be happy. And we're there. Lucas called it.
They use something, and they use that, and everybody runs after it. But, the thing is that the people out there, they don't think anymore. This is our problem. People don't think anymore. I mean, this bloke has been farming all his life, and they just don't notice that there's no more insects left where they're farming with a GM product.
Because they're taught to believe these things. All right. Well, Tians, thank you for the call and for the information. Unfortunately, the music is now playing, which means it's time for us to declare Pauhana Friday. Call it a day. We'll be back here Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So until then, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We cannot do this without you. Have a good weekend, and aloha, America.